All right, so we're back in the shop and we're working on our little Subaru 360 van restoration project. And you can see it's up on the lift, the engine's out, and the wheels are exposed, easy to get to. Today we are sorting through the brakes. We have all remanufactured, rebuilt wheel cylinders, master cylinder. These are the front wheel cylinders. Every wheel cylinder is different. There are 4 for the front of a Subaru 360 van. They are 15/16, I believe. Is that what my thing says? Yeah, 15/16. And each one is different. They're blind hole. In other words, they only move one direction. And there's a leading and trailing left and right for each side. So they cannot be mixed up. They only go one way. These brake parts you're looking at here are very hard to come by if you lose them. If you lose them, you are stuck. They're super hard to come by because they are so specific for the vans and the trucks. We also have a box full of shoes and other parts there, which we'll get to in a little bit. We're kind of doing a double whammy on this van. So we're getting the brakes ready to go on. I've got to figure out how to make brand new e-brake cables because those are shot. So I'm working on that, trying to think that out. Getting stuff ready, but we got the engine over here. We finally got it on our stand and we're cleaning it. And the best way to clean a nasty, dirty, rusty engine like this is pretty simple. I just take my shop vac with a nozzle, get the big chunks, and I basically suck out all the dirt and stuff using a screwdriver or an awl or a pick to pick out the big chunks of grease and dirt and grime, and then I will chemically clean it with carb cleaner or oven cleaner or whatever later on. But we're working on this thing. I had to use a torch again to get the roller bearings. Look how bad that was. That was in there. It was awful. I had to heat the ends of the rods up to get those out. They were completely stuck. And to get the pistons off, which the pistons were seized in the cylinders a couple of videos back, as you may recall, same thing. I had to heat the pistons up cherry red to get the piston pins out, which look like this. So I was able to knock those out. But all that work was not for naught. I now have a good crank, which is what I was after. All the other stuff's going to get replaced. So as you can see, I can roll around here. I'm checking the crank for end play. In other words, if I pull up or down, there shouldn't be any knocking or looseness. Same thing side to side. I'm going side to side. It feels good. And neither one is bent visually. The crank rotates 360 degrees and it's smooth. It doesn't seem rough. Surprisingly, for how rusted this engine is, the bearings within here have been oiled, albeit kind of old, greasy oil, but they seem to, crankshafts seem to survive on Subaru 360s. You can see this hose here that comes over from the oil pump. That is how the injector pump works. It actually pumps oil into the center of the crankshaft and it weeps up into the cylinders to oil the engine. Unlike premix vehicles or premix two-stroke, you mix it into the gas, which finds its way into the cylinders, but not necessarily the crankshaft. So Subaru is really smart about that. They oil the crankshaft first, and the oil that's left over then goes up in the cylinders and is burned and exhausted out the pipe. So I'm breaking this thing down today, and I just took the bolts out of the clutch cover here. I think it's ready to come. See what surprises we have in here. Throw-out bearing seems okay, but the whole clutch is going to get replaced. Oh wow, it's not missing. Oh, it is missing some fingers. It's got a lot of wear on the disc. So I do have new clutches in stock. We're going to break this clutch down. I'll do another video here in a second and show you what we're going to do next. Okay, so we're working on rebuilding our Subaru 360 motor here, the one that was in that little van I was talking about earlier. And the flywheel, how do I say this? The flywheel and the pressure plate are reversed in this situation. It's not really reversed. The flywheel bolts to the back of the pressure plate instead of having the flywheel bolt directly to the engine. So you've got to use a bit of a puller to get the pressure plate off the engine. It usually doesn't take much. I mean, I basically just snug this up a little bit. It takes 3 6mm bolts that normally go in the housing that connects the shaft of the distributor and the input shaft, I guess you might, input shaft collar. Just put 3 bolts through there and a puller, and the thing basically comes right off. We're going to take it off right now. You can see the flywheel comes off with it. So I'm going to set this on the ground. We'll take a look. All right, so we've got a really oily clutch. You can see the shine and the grease on there. This clutch is not going to work. It's completely oil soaked. We're going to basically rebuild it, throw it away. There is a lot of life left on it, but it's been slipping like crazy, or it would slip like crazy. So we're going to take the pressure plate and the flywheel to a machine shop, have them both surfaced, and have a new clutch disc made up. And then we're going to go back to the engine here. We're going to take a look into the clutch housing. You can see there's 4 bolts here. This seal is leaking oil. That's how come the clutch is wet. You can see the factory actually put this little piece of felt and a hole to try to wick oil away from the clutch, but you can see by the puddling here that it's not working. It's just too old. So we're going to put a new seal in here. We're going to take this housing off. There's a couple more bolts out here. I'm going to show you the drive gear upgrade that I always do on every Subaru 360 rebuild. Stay tuned. All right, so we're a little farther along on our Subaru 360 rebuild. We've got the bell housing / starter cover off, and we're looking at the drive gears of our Subaru 360. This is our crankshaft, our power. So this is the drive gear, and this is the driven gear. This is what goes to the transmission. So when the clutch is engaged and it's put into gear, power flows through this smaller gear to the bigger gear. And what usually happens is this nut backs off. It just rattles loose. So we're going to pin it. In other words, we're going to help the lock nut retainer there by actually drilling a couple holes between the nut and the shaft and putting safety wire through them. You would not believe how many Subaru 360s I've worked on that have a janky repair. Somebody tries to epoxy that nut, somebody tries to weld the nut, somebody tries to peen the nut, or the nut is completely fallen off. A lot of problems. This engine doesn't appear to be abused internally much, which I didn't know when I got into it because it was so rusted. But usually if these are not loose, the engine has been driven or it's had a pretty easy life. Now we're draining out some of the oil there. You can see it dripping. That always happens. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. I'll probably pop the seal out. This is the one that's leaking, and I may put this in the sandblaster to clean it all up. All right, let's move on to the next step. So I know somebody's going to ask, what's the correct fix for fixing that drive gear? This is not it. Can you see the weld on that thing? Let me zoom in on it. I can zoom in on it. That's somebody else's idea of a repair. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to fix it right. All right, so we're still fooling around with our Subaru 360 drive unit here, or we call it power unit. Again, this is our drive gear and this is our driven gear, and you can tell that I've taken the nut off, I've Loctited it, I cleaned it, I Loctited it, put the lock tab back on nice and tight. I also drilled 2 holes through the nut and through the end of the shaft and safety wired them. If you're serious about Subaru 360 performance, you must do this because you're putting more power from the engine into the transmission, and these things always loosen up. Let me repeat that. These things always loosen up, and they have really weird symptoms, like the car won't go into gear, the car won't roll, the car won't go into neutral. It does wacky things. And this can be done in the car, but it's much easier to do on the stand like I've been doing it here. So just want to repeat that probably 90% of the Subaru 360s that I work on, this nut has loosened up. So we're going to keep working around this engine. There's a few other things we're going to do. Next up, we're going to pop the top cover off to look at the transmission gears inside. We're going to measure the synchros, see how good they are. And then we're going to do something similar on this side. This is the fan side of the engine, the non-clutch side. We're going to pull this cover off, change that seal, and we're going to look at the overdrive gear. Sometimes that nut loosens up as well, and it creates some weird shifting issues. It's something I do on every engine, and it's worth being done. I'm sorry this engine's so crusty. I'll probably end up cleaning it as we go, or putting the covers in a sandblaster and cleaning those before I put them back on. Hang with me, let's move on. Okay, so we're working on our Subaru 360 two-stroke power unit, and we've got the shift top off the transmission where the shifter goes in right here. It then makes a connection with this shift fork mechanism. It's not really a shift fork, it's kind of the shift base. These are the forks here. But what we want to look at is right here. See these guys right here? These little spinny things I'm touching? Those are synchros. That's the second gear synchro, third gear synchro, and those are a pain to replace. These ones actually look pretty good. They might have a little too much play in them. Let's see. I'll have to get some measurements, but that's what you want to look at. You want to make sure these, slide this over a little bit, these little teeth are not all super sharp, super brass, showing lots of brass in the fluid. Otherwise, this is going to be a bad shifting transmission. So as I sort of suspected, being this nut hadn't been loosened, there hadn't been a lot of clutch drops or abuse to the transmission. So most likely the synchros are okay, but you never know. Sometimes it can fool you. So the second gear, third gear synchros are here. There is no first gear synchro. There is no reverse synchro, and the overdrive synchro is out here. So we'll check that next. All right, so we're working on our Subaru 360 engine here, the pretty rusted one that came out of that van that's over there for my customer. And first we popped off the clutch and the clutch cover on this side, be the distributor side of the engine. I think that's cylinder number 1, which will be right there. Then we checked the synchros for second and third gear, checked the gears, everything looked really good in there, everything looked pretty good here. But the last thing that I wanted to check was the overdrive assembly. Typically this nut loosens up and it creates some problems. I found a big problem. Look at this shaft right here. What do you see? The end of the shaft broke off. That stinks. This is supposed to be on there. All right, no amount of welding, no amount of gluing, it's going to fix that. So the tip of the shaft is wore off, and overdrive isn't going to work good because this gear is going to, eventually it's going to rattle off. That's a big problem. I'm glad I opened this up to look and check, but now I'm really sad because the gear set in this engine needs some help. And I think I can fix it, but it's going to be a lot more work. So that's probably going to be the end of the video for today. Kind of ends on a sour note. It's really too bad. I didn't expect that, but I guess knowledge is power, and I have a powerful reminder why I check things twice. So I don't know. Maybe it was a good idea I didn't clean this thing before I invested a lot in it. I got to talk with the customer and figure out what to do here. So, all right, thanks for watching, and we'll see what happens in the next installment of our video series. I do have parts to fix this, but it's going to be a big job. Thanks for watching.